Colonel Joe Abodeely, United States Army, Vietnam. I interviewed Joe in Scottsdale, Arizona almost 18 years ago, folks. It was November the 10th, 2006. I was doing interviews at that time down there. And Joe was an amazing story that he told me. He was a unit commander, a combat infantry unit commander. He commanded a platoon that actually went in and provided relief into Khe Sanh, was the first units into Khe Sanh in 1968 to relieve the Marines on the besieged Air Force Base there. It's just an amazing story he tells, as you will hear him relate to you in this interview. Joe was just a wonderful guy, 24 years of age in Vietnam. I think he's 81 now. But he served as a platoon leader, a commander with the 2nd Platoon D Company, 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines, 3rd Regiment, 1st Air Cavalry Division. Folks, the infamous 1st Air Cavalry Division. I love the hat he wears at the end of this interview. You'll see a picture of us in that hat, famous hat icon of many wars of the past, the 1st Cavalry Division. But he tells a great story, folks, and I'm just so happy to bring it to you today. His story's been here, and I'm going to thank Nolan and Sue Smith for stepping forward and offering to sponsor a Vietnam story. You guys, this is the story I chose. I know you wanted another gentleman whom I haven't interviewed yet, but I will soon. But thank you for supporting my work in our country and our veterans. It's great to work with you for the first time, and I hope we get to work together again. But I just honor you and thank you for helping me with this story. Joe's story is just powerful, and I want you to take ownership in that. So, folks, I'd like to encourage you also out there to help sponsor a story. I'm adding new stories onto my web page. It's called Sponsor a Veteran. It's on my website, larrycapello.com. The link's in the video description. You can click on it. You'll see pictures of my veterans. I'm just adding now a great segment of World War II aviators. It's called The Real Masters of the Air. You'll see their pictures. I think about the first 12 stories or some of them. I have some of the stories already on my YouTube channel and my radio station. But I would like you to consider sponsoring one of these stories. If you'd like to donate to my work, there's information always in the comment section of my videos and on my website, larrycapello.com. And I would really encourage you to just get involved with this work. Folks, freedom's not free, freedom is earned. We're fighting for the same freedoms today in our own country that our veterans fought for on foreign soil. It's imperative that we get this history out. We have people trying to erase our history. We have people trying to keep this out of our schools, keep your kids and your grandkids from learning about what happened. Thank God this station exists. Thank God Voices of History Radio exists. If you'd like to become a part of that also, it's 24 hours a day. You can download apps for free, Voices of History Radio, on the app stores, and then you can have a living history in the palm of your hands. And I encourage our young people to get involved with that. History teachers, great lessons here to be learned for your children, for your students, and as we go on forth into 2025, folks. So it's a very important time, and I'm so glad we've got this YouTube channel and radio station. I get so many amazing comments from people learning, being helped, touched, healed, blessed, reunited with family members, learning more about what their loved one may have experienced in war, in combat, and on and on. I just thank everybody that takes the time to comment on one of my videos. Okay, folks, thanks for watching, listening, sharing these stories, and subscribing to this channel. Let's keep this thing going. It's an incredible journey. I thank my God I can serve Him and my country through the lens of my camera. God bless you. Thank you for watching.
What year did you go to Vietnam?
January 68 to January of 69.
Okay. Give me the breakdown of the first cav. Was there a company, a battalion? Just give me all that in your MOS.
I was trained to be a combat platoon leader. The MOS was 1542. That's for an officer, infantry lieutenant, second lieutenant infantry. Went to Vietnam. I was originally slated to be assigned to the Americal Division. I think it was the 199th Light Infantry Brigade. I was there at Long Ben or Benoit, wherever it was, for a while, and while they were waiting to see, where I was going to go. And I guess the first Cav had enough casualties. They needed more second lieutenants infantry, so I went to. I was assigned to the 2nd Battalion, 7th Cavalry of the 1st Air Cavalry Division, 2nd of the 7th, which is part of the 3rd Brigade, which is part of the 1st Air Cavalry Division. At that time, they called it Air Cavalry because you may or may not recall that Johnson decided to send he called it the Air Mobile Division to Vietnam. This was in 1965. The 1st Cav was the first full division to deploy to Vietnam. The 173rd Airborne deployed as a brigade, and the Marines had sent over an expeditionary force. But the Army's first full division to deploy to Vietnam was the 1st Cavalry Division. And they had them all, they had the helicopters all wrapped up to protect it from the salt air and all that on the ships that they sent the division over with. And then if you saw the movie We Were Soldiers Once and Young about Hal Moore and his people, then Lieutenant Colonel Moore and his people, they were the first of the 7th, and that was the first time that regular troops of the North Vietnamese Army and the regular troops of the United States military clashed, and the propaganda was that America had won and defeated them and all that stuff, and probably did have created more casualties for the NVA. But the rest of the story that you don't see in that movie is the 2nd of the 7th, my old unit, but this was before I got there. I got there in 68. This all happened in 65. My old unit, the 2nd of the 7th, came, landed, and then they were in on patrol along diddly bopping through the brush. They apparently weren't very alert, and about half of them or more got wiped out. And that's the rest of the story, if you will. But the 1st Cavalry Division in Vietnam was very effective because it had all the helicopters. The helicopters, the icon of Vietnam. But what a lot of people don't know is every unit didn't have helicopters. Our organization was all helicopters. So I, as a platoon leader, didn't go anywhere by truck, didn't go anywhere by jeep, walked a lot, but when we had to conduct missions on long range, helicopters would pick us up and send us off over to where we were supposed to go to do the mission for search and destroy. So I was a 2nd lieutenant infantry in the 2nd platoon of the Delta Company of the 2nd of the 7th. That's the battalion that we're in. That's a long answer to your question, but it gives you a lot of other information.
Oh, that's good. And how old were you then when you went in country?
I was 24 years old. I was a little older than a lot of the other guys because I had gone through, let me go back a second. I was born and raised in Tucson, Arizona, native Arizona. Used to love to go hiking, shooting, those kind of skills. They were natural to me. Plinking. I still do that today. My wife lets me buy my toys, which are now, they're not BB guns anymore, they're more expensive rifles and other pistols. I like to shoot and plink. It's relaxing. Some people like to shoot pool, some people like to throw darts. I like to shoot, okay? Finished high school, went to a college in Iowa, College in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. I had a full scholarship there. Combination academic and athletic. I used to be athletic when I was younger. I like to jokingly tell people I played football and wrestled, ran track. I still look like a wrestler. Unfortunately, it's a sumo wrestler. But the bottom line is I used to be in really good shape. So I went to College, Cedar Rapids, Iowa, studied real hard, played in their football team, wrestled varsity as a freshman. I was a really good wrestler. But I decided I didn't want to stay there in Iowa because it was too cold. So I was going to go back to Arizona. But while I was back there, I got a call from West Point because I was the first alternate to West Point when I graduated from high school, and they wanted me to go take some tests. So during it was called Reading Week, so we were off that week. I got on a plane and flew to Chicago, got at O'Hare Field, O'Hare Airport, International Airport now, I guess. I don't know if it's called O'Hare Field in those days, but this was me about 1961 or 2. And anyway, make a long story short, I got in the cab, went to Fort Sheridan, and took all these little tests, hop, skip, and jump, and other things, and met with a major there from West Point. He was telling me about, the opportunities of a West Point education and a degree, and I wasn't interested in the military. I took ROTC the second semester at Co. My second semester, Air Force ROTC. I wasn't interested in the military. I wanted to get a civilian education. I came back to Tucson and went to the University of Arizona. I was a sophomore now. I just went to Co for 1 year. But University of Arizona was a land grant college, which means in those days you had to, ROTC, excuse me, was mandatory for the first 2 days, first 2 years. So I'd taken Air Force ROTC in Iowa, didn't like it. In fact, I got all A's and B's in my courses. I did really well, except I got 1 C, and that was in ROTC. So I went to the U of A, had to take ROTC, and I thought I'd take Army ROTC. A good buddy of mine that we went to high school together, he was 1 year older than I was, and he said, Joe, why don't you, there's going to be a war coming on. Remember, this is about 1962 now. There's going to be a war coming on. So why don't you join ROTC? You can go in as an officer. And I didn't have any use for the military. I didn't like the military. Didn't want to be involved with the military. And I liked Wayne. Wayne was, I even remember it was Wayne. I don't want to say his name on this thing, but Wayne's the guy that said, let's do it. Wayne was a year older, a year ahead of me in school, and we played in the band together. We both played trumpet, which you'll see comes into play a little later. So anyway, I joined, and I started liking it. And I did real well, and then I went into the advanced program. And I was in Scabbard and Blade, which is a military honorary, and then I was a distinguished military student, and then a distinguished military graduate, which means I was offered a regular Army commission. So I was really gung-ho. I wanted to be infantry. And now it's 1965, okay? That's when I graduated from college, and this is when Johnson sent over the 1st Cavalry Division over there. So I went a year to law school. I didn't want to take the regular Army commission in ordnance. I went a year to law school, so I was going to be infantry. It was my reserve commission. And I didn't do real well my first year in law school, my first semester. I goofed around a lot and argued with the professors, and thought I was smarter than everybody else. And that's not to comment on whether or not I was. But the bottom line is I did have to argue, like arguing a case. It was called moot court against the #1 guy in our first year class, the first semester, and I beat him. I beat everybody. So I felt really good. Second semester, I still was 1 point down to stay in school, so I had to re-examine in a certain course. But in doing that, because I'd gotten a deferment, remember when I graduated from undergraduate school as a DMG, got my commissions, I got my degree and I got my commission at the same time, and I got what's called an excess leave or a deferment from going going into the Army. Remember in those days, it's 1965, remember that old bit about people, you had to stay in school and not change your course of study, or you were going to go on active duty. So John Kerry, when he made that comment about study hard and be productive, otherwise you're going to find yourself in Iraq, that was even more true so about Vietnam. You didn't study hard, or you changed your course of study, you had that kind of problem, you were going to go to Vietnam. So I changed my course of study, went to graduate school in business for a semester, got A's and B's, re-examined the law school course, got a C. I was eligible to go back into law school, but Uncle Sam said, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, you're in the Army now. So I was all set to go back to school, but I had to report to my first duty station, which was a combat platoon leaders course at what I affectionately call Fort Benning School for Boys. Fort Benning, Georgia, the Army's infantry school. Went through that for, I forgot how long it was, because I'd already gotten my commission. It was like a refresher to being an infantry officer. And then after that, my first duty assignment was Fort Polk, Louisiana. And I was there for a while, pushed troops, trained troops, and then got my orders for Vietnam.
Let's get to Vietnam now. I don't want to run out of time.
Okay.
So tell me about going to Vietnam, and was it what you thought it would be when you got in country?
When I got in country, I got assigned to the 1st Cav. I go out on patrols. Remember, this was January of '68 when I got there. Now, if anybody knows anything about history, January 31st of '68 was the Tet Offensive. So the platoon I took over had been wiped out. Half of it was there. And I had a platoon sergeant who had been through World War II, Korea, and this was his third or fourth tour in Vietnam. And then when I met him, he was drunk. They were on a stand down kind of on the top of a little mountaintop. If you ever saw Apocalypse Now, remember that one time they flew him out by the helicopter? Boy, that brought me, because they flew me out by helicopter by myself to this little mountaintop where the company was just around the little top of the mountaintop. And so the sergeant was drunk, and he was crying. He was saying, "Lieutenant, please don't take my platoon from me." And I had the greatest amount of respect for him. I'm not making fun of him. But he was afraid that I was going to be one of these yahoos, 90-day wonders, going to come in and think I knew it all. And I knew that this was one place where I wasn't going to be a know-it-all, because it could be a matter of life and death. So what happened is we worked together for a while, but the other sergeant saw that he'd still be drunk and all. They got rid of him. They gave me a younger platoon sergeant, good guy. And I got over there and I realized that a guy could get killed doing this stuff. We went out on combat patrols. We went on combat air assaults. And the way the 1st Cav did an air assault, and they still don't do it right anymore, I don't think, because they don't have any reason to do it. It was like a ballet, or it was like a symphony. If we were going to go to an LZ, if we're here, and we're going to go over here, what they would do is they would prep the ground with artillery fire. They would blow the hell out of the ground, and then the lift ships would pick up the infantry troops. My platoon, in fact, when I started off with my platoon, I had like about 21, 22 platoons, supposed to have about 44. It eventually built up to that, but it was small like that, and so I eventually I divided my platoon into 3 large squads instead of 4 squads. But anyway, to conduct a combat air assault, the artillery would prep the ground, and then the last round would be a white phosphorus round, so you know that the regular high explosive rounds aren't destroying the ground anymore, and any enemy that might be there. Then the lift ships are on their way to go to that landing zone, and the gunships would come on in and make passes where they'd open up with if they had miniguns, they'd use that, all their 2.75-inch rockets. Later when the Cobras came online, they used their miniguns on their nose. They prep the ground, and then when they're done, then we land, and then the infantry gets out real quick and starts doing whatever they're supposed to do, blocking for, search and destroy, whatever. We were good at that. We were the best at that. After the war, they took the air mobile concept away from the 1st Air Cavalry Division, gave it to the 101st, and these guys are paratroopers. And there's so much pettiness in the military. Whether it's not just inter-service rivalry, Army versus Navy versus Air Force versus Marines. You have this, within the Army, you have the tank corps versus the infantry. Then of the infantry, you have what are called the straight legs, or basic infantry, which is what I was, versus the airborne. And so after the war, the air mobile concept was given to the 101st. And then you saw, like in Somalia, here's a classic case, Somalia, everybody's seen Black Hawk Down, the movie Black Hawk Down. In Somalia, why didn't they land the helicopters, have the guys unass the helicopters, conduct their patrols, instead of having them prove that they know how to rappel with 80-pound pack on the back and get shot at, and the guy falls and screws up the whole operation. But anyway, so we'd go out on patrols, we'd do combat air assaults, then we'd do search and destroy, we'd go through villages.
Tell me, I'm going to stop you for a second. A lot of my focus is the Air Mobile Division helicopters. Tell me about the Huey helicopter and what it was used for in Vietnam.
Huey helicopter was UH, and the first one was 1, and then it was an A model, then a B model. By the time I got there, we had Charlies, Deltas, hotels, Golf models. Those are the various models. They do little different things with the engine, all stuff. But the UE was a utility helicopter. That's what UH stands for, utility helicopter. I still think, I love helicopters, and I love Hueys. And I love those pilots that took us in and out of wherever we went. A lot of people will talk about the infantry gets on the ground, or the helicopter, or the pilots, or the gunners, the flash. But you forget some SOB has to take those people in and out. It's kind of like the guys in World War II who did the landing craft stuff. And they talk about the guys who got out and getting shot at. Who in the hell do you think brought them in there like they weren't getting shot at? Okay, and I'm saying this because I know you happen to have a friend of yours who knows all about that, and I don't need to explain that to you guys. But you see, people don't understand all this stuff. And so the truth of the matter is, the Huey helicopter, I love that helicopter. And I still go into stores today, into hobby shops today, to see if there are Hueys in there. Because they'll put the World War II stuff in there, and then they'll put the Apache in there, and they'll put the foreign helicopters in there, but they don't have the Hueys like they used to. And I think that's part of that let's forget Vietnam thing, which I'm really glad you're doing this, Larry, because we should not forget Vietnam. As far as I'm concerned, Vietnam's the most important war we've ever had, because that's where we learned a lot of things. Like, one, make sure you get public support. 2, we learned how to keep people alive longer. 3, we learned how to employ new weapons. 4, we understand the politics of war geopolitically a lot more. We learned a lot of lessons we should have learned from it. Obviously, we didn't because of the Iraq War, but that's a whole different story. But the Huey helicopter was used as a lift ship to take troops in and out of LZs. It was used as a logistic ship or a log ship to bring new recruits in, or to bring ammunition, food. When we're out in the boonies, I mean, we had our sea rations, but because we were the first Cav, as long as the helicopters could make the runs back and forth, we operated off of this big base, the first Cav's headquarters up north in the I-Corps area, called Camp Evans. They'd come out and they'd bring out Mermite cans. We'd have hot chicken, hot steaks, mashed potatoes, vegetables, because the helicopter could do that. I remember when we went in the Asha Valley, we were in the brush. It was all really thick vegetated. We're out of water. And they dropped these, they looked like long rubber wieners. They were just rubber containers with water in them. So the helicopter, I mean, I could be in thick canopy and I could tell you what kind of helicopter, whether it was a Huey, whether it was a Loach, which was the OH-6, the pregnant eggshell, which was the original observation helicopters. That's why they call it OH, observation helicopter. The Hueys were also used, they used as gunships early on. They put pylons on the side and they mounted 2.75-inch rocket pods or miniguns or 50 caliber machine guns or the M60 machine guns down there, or if you had a door gunner on the side, he had a M60 off the side of the opening, each door opening. So the Huey was used for all those purposes. Then we had Chinook helicopters, and those are the double rotor, the real big ones, and they're still in use today. In fact, they're the only ones that can work in Afghanistan because the air is so light, because they're up so high. The other helicopters, you don't see the Black Hawks working. You see just Chinooks doing all the work. But the Chinooks could carry almost an entire platoon in them. They were the ones that carried the 105 artillery howitzers from place to set them up, so that wherever we went, we knew we had fire support. I was confident every night. I take my platoon out, but they sent us out in the middle of nowhere. Here was a 24-year-old kid, and I had the power of life and death over about 25 to 30 to 40 different guys, different people at different times. And every time at night, I'd set up what are called Delta Tangos. The North A, East B, C, South, and D, West. That means I'd bracket in artillery fire, have them send the spotter rounds out there. They knew if we got hit, say, from the east, that night I'd call, got it on 8 Heavy Bones 2-6 fire mission over, request Hotel Echo, fire for effect, HE at Delta Tango, that means defensive target, Bravo. And I hear the guns crank up, boom, 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 boom. And then, if it wasn't in the right place, we'd adjust. But that's how quick the response we had. And one of the things that we did that I thought was pretty smart, Delta Company used to be a recon company, which means they had Jeeps with the Prick 25 radios in the back. Prick 25, PRC. A lot of the companies, an entire company, let me tell you the organization. A platoon normally has 40 people. A company has normally 4 platoons. And a battalion has normally 4 companies, okay? My platoon had 3 large squads instead of 4 squads. But when they changed over, for some reason somebody kept the radios and I didn't turn them in. Some companies had only 2 radios. My platoon, Prick 25 radios, my platoon had 5 Prick 25 radios. So we were way ahead of our time. You know, you watch all these movies now, all of our guys are going around, they all got some kind of communications with them. All the special operations force, they all got a headset and mouth set, and they could talk to each individual guy has this communication. Well, I had close to that. I started that. I'd like to think I started, because I had 3 large squads. Each one had a Prick 25 radio, and they all stayed together. And then I had my platoon headquarters, which consisted of my platoon sergeant, my 2 RTOs, means radio telephone operators, and my medic and me. So I could communicate with my squads, and I could communicate with company headquarters, or I could communicate with ARA, Area Rocket Artillery. Snoopy Flight, this is Heavy Bones 26, request fire mission over. And they bring a helicopter gunship in, and we pop with smokes and let them know where it is, relationship with the smoke, and get rockets and machine guns and all that stuff. So we had the Loaches, we had the lift ships, we had the big ships of the Chinooks, and then the flying crane was used to carry small tanks, artillery pieces. Combat is very scary. The first big firefight we got in, February 27, 1968, we crossed the river. My company commander came to me, he used to call me Skeeter. He says, "Hey, Skeeter, why don't you take your element, go across the river, and go and check this area out." And this was right at the end of the Tet Offensive. Battle of Way, end of Way, less than 20 miles, okay? We went along, crossed a little bridge. Well, first before that, we're walking along, and my point man saw a guy, looked like an ARVN, wearing the ARVN uniform, which was basically our OD green uniform, with a soft cap and like he had maybe a carbine. But anyway, he fired at our guy, and our guy fired at him. He called back, told me about it. I said, "Be careful, let's go up and check it out." We went to a little ditch, there was blood in the ditch. So we were still supposed to be going toward the river. And the ARVN had fired from over here, and then a Loach came over. It was a bubble chopper this time. It wasn't a regular OH-6, it was the old James Bond type helicopter, the bubble chopper. And he started shooting into that, knowing full well we were following him. I says, "Let's not follow him. Let's not get sidetracked. Let's keep going where we're supposed to be going." So we did. Crossed a little bridge, saw some old stone houses, open rice paddy, and then some other stone houses across the way. And my point guy came back and got the word back. He says, 2-6, I saw 11 or 12 NVA in the trenches. I said, "How do you know they're NVA?" He says, "Because they're wearing khakis. They got pith helmets." And I said, "Oh, shit." So I got everybody gathered around this little hooch. And then all of a sudden, all hell broke loose. RPGs came in. I had 3 guys wounded right up front. And then we were in their trenches. And all of a sudden, they were behind us. We wanted to cross back over across the bridge where we came. They were now behind us, so we couldn't go there. So we were totally surrounded. And I wanted 105 artillery fire support, but all the guns were trained on Way to give support over to Way. So eventually we got an ARA gunship. It came on in, but it didn't do enough to suppress the fire. And I had another guy shot in the arm. He was a machine gunner, and he was standing up. We had his gun in like a fork of a tree branch, and he was shooting, and he finally got shot in the arm. It was a clean wound. We brought him back to our trench. He gave him morphine. He just slept it out the rest of the time. Then another sergeant was standing up behind. He was a backup point. He was standing up shooting offhand. He got shot in the arm, spun around, got shot in the back, came out in the lung. My platoon medic and I crawled out under fire, dragged him back into the trench. Eventually, the rest of the company came on up, but before they came on up, I got 4.2-inch mortar support fire. Now, I forgot from my infantry training, the 4.2-inch mortar is about the same millimeter as a 105 artillery round. And we heard that boom, 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 boom. And they came on in, and it just took out where we were getting the fire from. Trees were flying, it just really suppressed the fire. But then the rest of our company came up from behind us, and they were doing recon by firing, just shooting ahead. So we had to stay down. They called us, let us know. Stay down. They swept into the area where we were receiving the fire, major part of the fire. And anyway, found all kinds of commo wire and everything. This was part of an NVA regiment. My platoon was taking on a regiment. Regiment's like a battalion, so 4 platoons to a company, 4 companies to that, so about 16 times their size. Anyway, when it was all over, I went over, they came up to me, they says, 260, you did a real good job today. I got all my guys out. The medevac, I got to tell you a story about the medevac. We called medevac in, and my platoon sergeant and I came out with a machete. We were chopping some small saplings so the helicopters could. That's the other thing the UE was used for a medevac ship. I forgot to mention that. Anyway, the UEs were coming in, the firing was going on, and as the UEs started to land, all the firing stopped. We got the wounded guys on it, 5 guys wounded that day, got them on, got them out, and then the firing started up again. I'd like to think that the NVA recognized the Red Cross and honored the Geneva Conventions. If I wanted to be cynical, they were just regrouping and gathering while we were taking our wounded out. Anyway, the company commander and one of the senior lieutenants came up and says, Lieutenant Abodeely did a good job, and blah, blah, blah. Said, thanks. I went over behind a big tree and I cried. The emotion. That was the only time. Here I was leading the guys doing this, that, and the other, but then the emotion was so tight that I finally let it go. I didn't want anybody to see me, so I went over the tree by myself. All 5 of the guys lived. I heard from Doc, my medic, later on, that the sergeant that got shot in the arm started on the lunch. They got him back in time, got him to Tokyo, and he lived. I made up my mind that day, February 27, 1968, I never was going to lose a man. We went on other patrols, we got in other firefights, we get in ambushes, we get out of it, we get mortared, we get rocketed, we get out of it. We then heard we were going to go to Khe Sanh, and my mom and dad had been sending me all the clippings about Khe Sanh. And I believed that if there ever was a place on earth that had to be like hell, it had to be Khe Sanh. We heard about all the horrible stories. The Marines were pinned down. They couldn't even walk outside. They had to be in the bunkers. They run back and forth. Planes were getting shot down and everything. So I kept a diary, and even in my diary, I wrote in this, we're going to be the lead element in Khe Sanh. This is just a glory push. I'm scared. Well, the task to lead the 20,000-man operation in Khe Sanh was given to the 1st Air Cavalry Division, and because we did it in conjunction with some Marines and with some Marvins. And then the lead element was going to be the 3rd Brigade, which is composed of, the division is composed of 3 brigades. 3rd Brigade is composed of 3 battalions. Our battalion, 2nd of the 7th, was going to lead, and our company wound up leading. When we were flying to get, first of all, we had a couple staging areas, LZ Stud, LZ Kalu, and as we got closer, I remember flying over these cliffs and all that, and I saw, it looked, I'm pretty sure to this day, it looked like a Sabre jet. It was down in the, and I'm saying to myself, I'm in a helicopter. If these guys could shoot down a jet, we're in a helicopter, okay? It's like the difference between trying to catch a cow or a racehorse, okay? So, anyway, we landed. We landed in big bomb craters because the B-52s had blown the hell out of the area. And then we were supposed to go up to Highway 9, which was the highway that takes you into Khe Sanh, the fire base. There was a little Khe Sanh City too, and there was also Langvay Special Forces Camp, which had been overrun. That's the place that was overrun by these light tanks a short period before. Well, anyway, we were supposed to be the last in order of movement this day, but we weren't. They brought us back, and we wanted to be the first in order of movement. So we moved up, we flew over and landed on this hard ground area, and there were a bunch of reporters with us. And then as we started moving up, we could see that there were bunkers and stuff, so they picked the reporters up, got them out of there. But to make a long story short, one of my guys, one of the RTOs of one of the lead squad, called back, said 2-6, it looks like there are bunkers up there and their weapons. And I says, oh shit. I says, be careful, keep moving. Because we were going like almost like a volcanic type hill, because it was just barren. No plants, no nothing. It was hard ground. If we had to dig in, we wouldn't have been able to dig in. So we kept going and going, and then they says, we're there. And I said, what do you find? He says, nobody. So we got up there, we got in the perimeter. It was an NVA regimental-sized complex right at the intersection where Highway 9 goes into Khe Sanh and then went off to NVA, to Langvay Special Forces Camp. And it was all pockmarked with B-52 bombings. We found a dead NVA with blood coming out of their eyes and nose, ears, and stuff. And that's where one of my guys gave me a bugle, and I had an AK-47. There were 2 miles left to get into Khe Sanh. We stayed there that night, and then we were told my platoon was to clear the road going into Khe Sanh. Now, the newspaper clippings say, went through all of this and then met no resistance the last part of the way. Well, what had happened, I believe, is the bombing got people out of there. But as we walked down the road on either side of the road, all the way along on either side of the road, my recollection was there were bunkers just lining it. Fighting positions or bunkers. And we used to call them gook packs, the rucksacks that the NVA used. We kind of liked those because we didn't have any rucksacks, you know. The airborne did, but we didn't. We had the butt pack, but we liked those canvas type, sand-colored, we call them gook packs. It's a derogative term, but that's what we call them. Found a lot of opium, morphine. One of my guys found a big bag of raw opium, and he says, what do you want me to do with this? I says, take it back and turn it in. That guy's probably still living off of that today. By the way, I didn't have any problem with any drugs in my unit. I never used drugs. I didn't tolerate the use of drugs. One time I had to counsel a young black man who happened to be in the squad that was mostly Southern boys. They wanted to tell on him. I went over and gave him the raw thing, and everybody's dependent on you. Don't do that anymore. Because what am I going to do, court-martial him? Send him back and lose a man that's trained out there? Never had that problem anymore. I had black guys in my platoon, no racial stuff because I knew I wasn't going to tolerate it. Had a couple Puerto Rican guys in my platoon. One of them couldn't speak English. I'd studied Spanish for 4 years, so I'd talk to him a little bit in Spanish. I don't know whether he understood me or not, but I could point and say something in Spanish. He put the trip flares out, the claymores out, and shot in the right direction, so that was good enough for me. The other guy that could speak a little bit of English did most of the interpreting for both of us. Not a problem.
So there was drug usage in Vietnam, though, at times, right?
The only time that I ever heard of it in my platoon, one time, a guy was using a marijuana joint. Now, you hear about these units being rampant with it and all that. You know, there are a lot of myths about Vietnam. The first one being that America got driven out of Vietnam. That's not true. We were not driven out of Vietnam. The Democratic Congress didn't like a Republican president. And I'm a registered Republican, and I don't like this Republican president, and I'll say it for the camera. I think he's a war criminal, and hopefully somebody will take care of that down the road. But the truth of the matter is, they didn't like it, and so they ceased funding the war. We had to come home. We left in 1973. The war went till 75. NVA beat the hell out of the South Vietnamese, but saying a lot of us Vietnam veterans like to use as we were winning when I was there. But, yeah, answer your question, yeah, I guess there was drug usage, but I didn't see it. I didn't have any problems with it. The thing I'm proudest of my whole life, Larry, first of all, we led the reef column into Khe Sanh. I brought the clippings on that. The Marines will tell you they fought their way out. If they did, then why weren't they going up and down Highway 9 before we got there? Okay.
About playing the bugle.
Well, going in at the last minute, well, first of all, we were going up the road. Remember I was telling you about the road with bunkers? We saw all this stuff, and there were a lot of little bomblets we had to be careful of. And so we finally get to the fence, and we see 3 Marines on a mule. You know what a mule is, a little flat vehicle, flat car type thing with a seat on the front and the steering wheel. And they were out at the garbage dump. And one of the guys from the 3rd platoon, mine was the 2nd platoon, reached through and said hi to him. We said hi, this, that, and the other. We were told to stay there that night. The next day, we walked in. My platoon was the first to go in. I was the first officer to walk in. And I had this bugle that one of my guys gave to me. I also had an AK-47. I probably looked like a real sight. I had my normal stuff, my bandolier, my M16, an AK-47 strapped across me, and a bugle. And my company commander said, "Hey, 2-6, do you know how to play that?" Remember I told you that guy Wayne, and I used to play in a band. The guy says, "Well, long ago I did." He says, "Play charge," because we're the cavalry. So we're walking in to Khe Sanh, and I go, da 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 da, and you got a kick out of that. Anyway, so we get in there, and I report to this Marine. I think he was a captain. He was very disdainful. I said, "Sir, Lieutenant Abodeely, 2nd Battalion, 7th Cavalry, 1st Cavalry Division, reporting for duty." He says, "Lieutenant, take your platoon." And he gave us the long side, the side that a reinforced Marine company was occupying. The bad side, where all the claymores and trip flares and the big containers, 55-gallon drums filled with food gas and other explosive and all this stuff, because it was the side where they always got the bonsai charges. Gave it to my platoon. And I had to stretch my platoon out to cover this, basically the extension of the airstrip. We were about every 50 meters, manning every 2 or 3 bunkers. And I'd go all the way up and down and check the guys, because I was a very conscientious guy. I was a good platoon leader, and I'm not ashamed to say that. I'm not going to be immodest about it. The thing I was trying to tell you, the thing I was proudest of my whole life is I went through the bloodiest part of the war, and I never lost any of my men. January 68, I was in the field, January 68 to June of 68. Normal tour for troop, about 6 months. January, February, March, April, May, June. Then after that, after Khe Sanh, we spent that night there, and I even, in my diary, if we could look at it, you can see, I write real big because I'm writing by the moonlight. I could see something, either it was Snoopy or maybe it was just a regular gunship firing tracers rounds into Cambodia or what it looked like, and I'm writing that. But so we did that. Then we went down Highway 9 the next day. I guess several days, we were clearing Highway 9. The engineers were fixing bridges that were blown out, and everything was getting all squared away. And then I guess we left, and then I guess the Marines eventually dismantled Khe Sanh. Then we immediately went into Asha Valley, and that was scarier than anything else. They picked us up down outside of Camp Evans. It was warm. They told us only about 5 people per ship, because normally we could take 7 or 8, because we were going to go a long ways and carry a lot of extra ammunition. And we had our sleeves rolled up because it was hot down there. And the area outside of Camp Evans, a lot like Arizona scrub brush, like creosote bush and stuff like that. So we picked us up and we started climbing. It starts getting colder. We start rolling our sleeves down. And then we're going to see these mountains, real green, triple canopy, forested, and, there's rivers snaking through there. You're waiting for a brontosaurus to stick his head out of the water. It looked really, really primitive. And then, but we had heard about all the helicopters that were shot down. They were shooting down flying cranes, shot down 2 of them that I remember monitoring the radio. And we didn't have a landing zone to land. We had to land where a helicopter crashed in front of us and burned out a little spot, and we didn't even land. He put us right above it, and we jumped out. And the hills, everything was just steep hill and all that stuff. So we did that, and then they put my guys on the point where they were receiving most of the fire. I was a senior platoon leader in my unit, in my company, and we always got those kinds of tasks. I think it's because we did a good job. And make a long story short, we did do a good job, and then we had the orders to walk off the side of the mountain. And it took us 2 days to walk down the side of the mountain. And at night, we'd sleep between little saplings. Otherwise, you'd roll off the side of the mountain. It was so steep. I mean, I'd hiked before at Mount Lemmon and Tucson, and I love to climb mountains and out in the desert and rocky terrain and forest terrain. This was the steepest terrain I'd ever been on. We go along the base of the floor, and then, believe it or not, I got bitten by something. And I remember seeing a centipede about this long. I got bit by something. My hand swelled up to 2 or 3 times its normal size. So I went in on a log ship, and then the rest of the company came back in. They got mortared after I left. I felt, let me give you a little mystical view here. I felt there was like some type of protection around us as we went out there. I felt that when we went out on patrol, because I had such good control of my guys. I taught them how to do it. I even taught the guys how to call in artillery fire in case I got killed. And I love these guys. They're like my kids. And we'd go out on patrol. And it wasn't diddly bopping. We're out on patrol. I'd be watching the point guy. I say, back up a bit. And I wanted those formations to look like formations, combat formations. So everybody their rifle was to the outside, and they were all paying attention. And I believe that helped us a lot, because I think anybody realized that if they made contact with us, they were effing with the wrong element. So made it through my last day in the field. I remember 2 RTOs I had there. And they were talking. I said, this is going to be my last day. I'm going to go and be the assistant S4, assistant supply officer for the battalion. And they were talking. They said, well, 2-6, we'd get in ambushes. 2-6 gets us out of ambushes. I heard them talking. I took that as a compliment because it was true. And then the rest of the time, then I was what we would call a REMF, R-E-M-F, Rear Echelon Mother. It rhymes with trucker. Starts with an F. And I'd get the supplies out to the people. And then we moved from up north down south to 3 Corps area, out at the rubber plantations. And this is outside of Quan Loy and An Lac. An Lac, by the way, is where the NVA ultimately did their final push to come into Saigon. But this is in 1960. Still 1968, end of 68, I rotated in January 69. But we were down there, and that's when my old company landed in a hot LZ along the Cambodian border when Johnson had halted the bombing. And then all of a sudden it dawned on me the politics of the war. Why are you doing that? The bombings would keep them suppressed. And the old company landed in an open area, and the NVA just guessed where it was going to be because nobody prepped the area. No, remember I was telling you how we conduct the combat air assault? Nobody prepped it with artillery. Nobody prepped it with bombing. Gunships didn't even go over and strafe it. Just landed the troops over there like it was just a live fire exercise out in, at Fort Benning, Georgia, or something like that. And they landed, and the NVA had 3 50 caliber machine guns triangulated, had them in crossfire. And we were monitoring the radio push because I would work at night. I was a base defense sector commander for this air base at Quan Loy. I had 1/3 of it. And I'd get what we call the clerks and jerks that go out and man the bunkers at night. And in the daytime I was supposed to sleep, but I wanted to hear what was going on in this action. And apparently the grass caught fire. Guys were taking off their blouses and trying to put out the fire. The 50 caliber machine gun fire was mowing everybody down. 50% casualties. They're shooting medevac choppers out of the sky. Anyway, so I eventually rotated home in January. Came home, that was it.
When you're in Vietnam, are you conscious of what you're fighting for? Are you fighting for God and country, for survival, for each other? What's going through your mind?
I gave that little background about my education. It's important because I have respect for people who serve in the military. But everybody who serves in the military is not a rocket scientist. I was very highly formally educated when I went to Vietnam. But I personally went to Vietnam to help the South Vietnamese people. I believe in what Kennedy said, that's not what your country can do for you, what you can do for our country, for your country, and we will fight any foe, defend any friend, go anywhere, all that other stuff. I believed in that stuff. And like I said, I got over there and I realized, geez, a guy could get killed doing this stuff. Once you're there, politics, I didn't care about politics. My job was to do my job, to be a good officer, to do what I was supposed to do, follow orders, train my guys as we went along, because I had to train them even as we went along, and stay alive and keep them alive. Speaking of training, I have another one little vignette to tell you. I was a new platoon leader, and we had moved from down south, because we started off at a place called Phan Thiet. The company was kind of like on a mini R&R, if you will, because Phan Thiet was along the beach People figure that was like an R&R for everybody. I got there in time to leave, so I didn't get to enjoy any of it. We went up north to a place called Bonson. And there was a bridge called the Bonson Bridge, which was over the Bonson River. The bridge was a rail bridge. It was the only bridge that was left to cross the river. So the different platoons would take turns manning it. Different companies would take turns manning it, and the platoons would. And so we did. It was our turn. And at this time, I had my platoon sergeant, the one I told you about. He was short, getting ready to rotate. And he had a pet who he made a buck sergeant. And he was short, getting ready to rotate. And everybody else in my platoon was Spec 4 or lower, E4 or lower. No sergeants. Not E7s or E6s, not even any E5s. So I was told we had to send a patrol out that night. And I was new with the platoon. And I said, I need a patrol. I asked those two sergeants, they said, no, we're short, we can't do that. And I didn't just want to order them to do it. So I went out and I says, guys, we don't have anybody to do it, so we're going to go out on patrol. They said, who's going to take it out? And I says, I'm going to take it out. And I says, he says, you're going to take it out? Because see, the platoon leaders don't have to do it. You have your sergeants do that too. And I says, I'm going to need some volunteers. And I could just see the looks in their eyes. They're all looking, who's this character? Who's the lieutenant that's going to take this? I got a bunch of volunteers because I think they wanted to see what the lieutenant was going to do. So we saddle up for evening patrol. We get down along the bank of the river, and we go out about a click. On the bunker on the river, on our side there, we had a starlight scope, and we had a 90 millimeter recoilless rifle with beehive rounds in it, little flechettes, like little nails. My main RTO was a guy named Pee Wee. And of course, you know he's going to be the RTO because I think he was the smallest guy in the platoon. So somebody came up with the idea, let him carry the radio before I got there. So he and I and about, I don't know, maybe 10, 12 guys are walking along the bank, and Pee Wee touches the side of the bank, and it was just enough to make this big clod of dirt come down on him, knock him in the water, and bury the radio, and get the handset all wet and everything. So we're walking along further, and then we get out, and we set up just out. And the bank is about as high as this room is, maybe 8, 9 feet, 10 feet. So we get out of the bank, get up along the side, and we're in a little furrowed field, and then the jungle's out there. So there's the jungle, then the furrowed field that we're in, and then the riverbank's behind us. And so maybe it was only about 8 of us. But anyway, to make a long story short, I'd say to Pee Wee, try and contact them back there. So I'd say, Heavy Bones 26 Alpha, this is Heavy Bones 26. Shh. That shh is a rushing sound on the Brick 25 radio. Heavy Bones 26 Alpha, this is Heavy Bones 26. Shh. Then they'd call us, Heavy Bones 26, this is Heavy Bones 26 Alpha. Shh. Well, we could hear them, but they couldn't hear us. So they said, if you could hear us, break squelch twice. So that's how we communicated. So we stayed down, tried to stay awake all night. We're cold, wet, because we'd all been in the water. And the next day we walked back, and there was several lessons from that little thing. First of all, the first lesson is the platoon knew I would never ask them to do anything that I wouldn't do myself. Second lesson, radio communications is always important. And I don't know if there are probably some other lessons, but those were the first two most important, that the platoon leader wouldn't ask you to do what he wouldn't do himself, and always have good radio comm. And so that's what we did.
When you came home, Joe, from Vietnam, did you have any type of homecoming, or
No.
what was your experience coming home? Where were you and what happened?
I went from Vietnam, I think it was to Travis Air Force Base. I was there for a couple of days. And then they flew me to Phoenix. My mom and dad drove up from Tucson to Phoenix. They met me there. It was just the two of them. And they were glad to see me. I couldn't believe I was home. We got in the car. My mom sat in the back seat. My dad drove. And I was in my uniform, and I was just looking out the window, driving to Tucson from Phoenix. And when we got to Picacho Peak area, there's a bunch of pecan trees, and I guess they had these little lights on that keeps them warm during the winter. Because, it was back in January '69. And they're like purple, I think. And I just thought it was so surrealistic. Went home, looked around the house. My dad was proud of me. He's the one that got the people to interview for the stuff that's, the clippings I gave you. There's one from the Daily Star and one from the Citizen. But the other ones are from three national things themselves, three national newspapers themselves, UPI and Iowa and Florida. But it was quiet. I registered to get back into law school. The law school was very happy to see me because they knew what I would have done. They knew I was in a way, I think I was somewhat of a hero to some people who knew about it. But remember, nobody was a hero in Vietnam at this time. In any other war, I would have probably been a war hero. As far as I'm concerned, all the guys that went and served are heroes. Okay? I mean, what the media did and what the people who didn't like the war did is they used the veterans as scapegoats, and they used an entire generation of young men and a few women as scapegoats, and I think it's a shame. It's horrible. I was very patriotic. I'm still patriotic. I came back, and then I did the National Guard Reserves. I retired as a full colonel. I'm a graduate of the Air War College, a graduate of National Defense University. I taught ROTC classes on military law, switched over to JAG after I graduated from law school. And I wrote the Department of Army's Investigation of War Crimes Policy for Desert Storm. But back to what you say, or what you ask, that was really bad. I didn't like. There was a time, even when I was in the Guard, I had my uniform and I had my combat infantryman's badge, and I had a couple rows of ribbons, and they were combat ribbons. They weren't heartbeat ribbons. They weren't for wiping the wing ribbons or swabbing the deck ribbons. They were for risking my ass in combat during the bloodiest part, and I didn't know it then, I do now, of what wound up being our nation's longest. I didn't know it then, but I do now, and most unpopular war. And I went back into law school. The October moratorium came on. I spoke about that, and I got jeered. I said, people said, you don't know how horrible it is in Vietnam. I said, how do you know? You guys haven't been there. Because they're all draft dodgers. And, yeah, that really bothered me. But what I think really helped me is I knew what I did. I knew I did my job well. And being in law school kept me occupied. So I didn't have to, I didn't sit around and mope about anything.
What does the American flag mean and represent to you?
It's a symbol of our country, but I'm not one of these guys that gets all bananas. It was my generation. It was the Vietnam generation where people burned the flag. They burned it in protest. I don't think the flag should be held up as like it's a crucifix. For that matter, I don't think a crucifix should be held up that high. These are all symbols. They're not worth causing physical damage to somebody for. I mean, I love my country and I respect my country, but I don't want it to be a situation where somebody wears a flag or says something about the flag, and then somebody wants to pick a fight with them or kill them or harm them or something like that.
We're just about out of time. One question: what sights, sounds, or smells today remind you of Vietnam?
Rainy days. Rainy days remind me of Vietnam. Smell of gunpowder. If it's strong, when you shoot, it normally doesn't happen that way. But depending on some types of guns, or if there's gunpowder smell, cordite, gunpowder. I'm actively involved with the Vietnamese community. I like seeing the Vietnamese women with their beautiful flowing gowns and dresses It reminds me of Vietnam. And we have an event called Base Camp where we invite the people to come out and have like a picnic party type thing once a year. And we actually fly the big Republic of Vietnam flag.
How about any music today from the past? Is that
Oh yeah, Jimi Hendrix, and war, by war, I guess it is, and Love Is Blue by Paul Moriarty. I think that was #1 in 1968. Late at night, we'd be in the boonies, or we'd be on a base camp that wasn't Camp Evans, but another smaller one. Turn the radio on, and you could push it to the right frequency, and we could play the Paul Moriarty song "Love Is Blue." That always reminds me of Vietnam. Kind of a sad song.
Are you proud that you're a Vietnam veteran?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm proud of all those who served in Vietnam. And the people who speak about Vietnam ought to keep their mouths shut. They don't know what they're talking about. And the people that are talking about Iraq being like Vietnam is wrong. Iraq makes Vietnam look like a quest for the Holy Grail. It shows all the more how right we were for being there. We went to Vietnam to help the South Vietnamese people who were being overrun by the North Vietnamese. And it wasn't just a civil war then. South Vietnam was a separate, independent government. It may have been an extension of the French, but it was an independent government being overthrown by force of arms. That overthrow violated the UN resolutions, and it violated the CEDAW Treaty, and it violated just general principles of international law. And we had a duty to help them. And we did help them, we did well. But the bottom line is, people get tired of war after a long time. We're now tired of Iraq. But nobody wants to say it. A few people, I take that back. The people have just voted, they have just said it. I'm very proud to be a Vietnam veteran. I do a lot of things with Vietnam veterans. Tomorrow at the parade, it's gonna be first year in a while we haven't been in the parade. Last year we won first place for historic vehicles. Historic presentation was us and a couple of vehicles. But a group of us are gonna meet over at one of the restaurants along the parade route and watch the parade.
One last thing I'm going to ask you to do from where you're seated. I asked all the veterans this, and for the camera's sake, when I tell you, Joe, could you give me a salute into the camera?
Sure.
Okay, right into the camera, Joe. Great.